Jess is scrolling before bed, half paying attention, when a video stops her thumb. A guy standing in front of an exotic car, marble countertops behind him. A caption that says something like, "How I made 6 figures with one simple trick." He looks relaxed, confident. Like none of this took any real effort at all. Jess doesn't know that the car in that video is a same-day rental from a company that specifically markets to content creators. She doesn't know the marble countertops belong to a studio space rented by the hour. She just sees the result, feels a small familiar pang of, "Why don't I have that yet?" and keeps scrolling. Here's the part nobody tells you scrolling through financial content at 11 at night. A meaningful share of the visible wealth signaling in that entire content category, the cars, the backdrops, the casual flex, is rented, staged, or financed, specifically because it performs better than the honest version ever could. This isn't a video calling out any specific creator, and it's not a video telling you financial content is worthless. Plenty of it is genuinely useful. It's a video about a specific, quiet mechanism, the fact that the entire incentive structure of this content category rewards looking wealthy over being wealthy, and what that's actually costing viewers who never learned to tell the difference. Let me show you how it works. My name is Alex, and I spend a genuinely unreasonable amount of time looking at where people's money quietly vanishes to, and sometimes where an entire industry's credibility comes from somewhere other than where it looks like it comes from. If you've ever felt behind comparing yourself to a finance influencer's lifestyle, hit subscribe, because today on Wealth Adjacent we're taking apart the set behind the shot. Before we go further, a quick disclaimer. This isn't financial advice, and I'm not naming names, because this isn't about any one person. It's about a pattern that shows up across an entire category of content. What I am here to do is explain the actual incentive structure underneath it, so the next piece of aspirational financial content you see gets evaluated on substance instead of scenery. Let's introduce someone. Jess, mid-20s, works in customer support, follows a handful of finance accounts because she genuinely wants to get better with money. She's not naive. She just, like most people, has never had a reason to question whether the backdrop in a video is actually real. Let's start with the number, because it is genuinely a little unhinged. There's an entire rental industry built specifically around exotic and luxury vehicles marketed to content creators, offering same-day, hour-by-hour, or single-shoot rentals precisely because the demand for wealthy-looking footage vastly outpaces the number of creators who could actually afford to own those vehicles outright. Let me say that again. There is a functioning commercial industry whose entire business model is renting the appearance of wealth to people making financial content, which means every time you see one of these cars in a video, the honest odds that it's actually owned by the person standing next to it are genuinely worse than you'd assume. Where does the disconnect between perceived and actual creator income actually come from? Research on creator economy earnings consistently finds income within any given content category is extremely top-heavy. A small share of creators capture the overwhelming majority of the visible attention and revenue, while a much larger share earn modest amounts, and viewers, seeing primarily the top of that distribution because it's what gets recommended and shared, badly overestimate what a successful finance creator typically earns. The algorithm shows you the exception and lets you assume it's the rule. It's worth sitting with how mainstream the staging economy around this has actually become. Beyond exotic car rentals, there are studio spaces specifically decorated and marketed toward finance and business content, complete with bookshelves, city view backdrops, and minimalist desks designed to read as successful entrepreneur at a glance. There are prop rental services for watches, designer bags, and office decor, all priced by the day specifically because the target customer only needs the appearance for the length of a single shoot. None of this is hidden or illegal. It's simply a business-to-business industry that most viewers on the consumer side have never had a reason to know exists, which is exactly why it works as well as it does. And here's the part that should make you sit up. Multiple independent surveys of content creators across categories, including finance specifically, find a significant share admit to staging or exaggerating their apparent financial success at least occasionally, whether through borrowed props, rented locations, selectively shown screenshots, or simply not disclosing that a specific win was a single lucky outcome rather than a representative result. This isn't a fringe behavior. It's common enough that industry surveys treat it as an expected, measurable pattern rather than a scandal. But staged content by itself isn't the trap. A rented car in a video is just a rented car. Here's where it becomes a trap. A significant share of people who follow financial influencers report the content has directly influenced a real financial decision, a purchase, an investment, a course enrollment, specifically because the creator's apparent success made the advice feel more credible. And the genuinely uncomfortable stat sitting right next to it. A notable share of people who purchased a financial course or program specifically because of a creator's visible lifestyle later reported that lifestyle didn't hold up to scrutiny once they looked closer. Read that twice. People are making real financial decisions informed specifically by a signal that was never a reliable indicator of anything in the first place. Back to Jess. She'd been following one particular account for about a year, drawn in specifically by the lifestyle content, and had been seriously considering an expensive course this person was selling, partly because the visible success made the advice feel proven. She never actually checked whether the car in the background videos matched anything in the person's own disclosed business filings, because it never occurred to her that there'd be a gap between the two at all. Most people don't check. There's rarely an obvious reason to. She is not the exception. Most people evaluating financial content report the creator's apparent lifestyle plays a meaningful role in how credible they find the advice. Even when directly asked, most people also say lifestyle signals shouldn't logically affect the quality of the advice itself. Now here's the part that turns this from a marketing problem into a psychology problem, and this is the part that should genuinely fascinate you once you see it clearly. This runs on social comparison theory, the well-documented tendency to evaluate our own standing specifically by comparing ourselves against visible others, especially others who appear similar to us in some way, age, background, starting point. A finance influencer isn't just delivering advice. They're delivering a comparison target, and the more relatable and just like you, but further along, the framing feels, the more powerful that comparison becomes, regardless of whether the visible markers of success are actually real. A researcher studying social comparison online found something almost too honest. People report feeling worse about their own financial progress, specifically after consuming aspirational financial content, even when the actual informational content of that video was neutral or genuinely useful, because the comparison signal operates almost entirely separately from the informational content itself. You can learn a genuinely good tip and still walk away feeling worse because your brain processed the backdrop as data about your own life. And then there's the specific mechanism that makes this particular illusion so persistent. Financial content specifically rewards signals of already having succeeded, because here's how you too can become like me, performs measurably better than here's a technique, results may vary considerably. That incentive exists independent of any individual creator's honesty, which means even well-intentioned creators face real pressure to present a more finished, more successful version of their situation than reality currently supports, simply because the format itself rewards that framing. It's worth naming that this exact pattern isn't unique to financial content either. The same staged lifestyle mechanism shows up in fitness content, where a physique achieved through professional lighting, camera angles, and temporary water manipulation gets presented as an everyday baseline. It shows up in beauty and skincare content, where results attributed to a specific product often owe more to filters and editing than the product itself. Financial content simply applies the identical playbook to a different visible marker, wealth instead of appearance. But the underlying mechanism, a staged signal standing in for a genuine result, is the exact same one that's been quietly reshaping consumer behavior across several unrelated content categories for years. Now, before we go further, we still haven't gotten to the specific staging patterns that show up across this content category. Hold that thought, because first, the smaller signals. Let's talk about the phrase that should trigger alarm bells the moment you see it. Here's what I made this month, shown as a single screenshot with no context about whether that month was representative or a clear outlier. A single strong screenshot, shown without the surrounding months, tells you almost nothing about typical performance, and the format practically guarantees you'll only ever see the outlier, because nobody screenshots an average month. Then there's the borrowed space pattern. Hourly studio rentals designed specifically to look like a home office or personal residence, complete with generic decor meant to feel lived in rather than staged. This isn't unique to finance content, but it shows up specifically in this category because success gets visually coded as a particular kind of home environment, one that's genuinely expensive to actually own but comparatively cheap to rent for a few hours of filming. There's a testimonial version of this pattern too, worth naming specifically, selectively featuring the small number of course participants or followers who had strong outcomes, while the much larger group with average or disappointing results simply never gets mentioned, creates an impression of typical success built entirely from atypical examples. It's not necessarily dishonest in any single testimonial. The person featured did have that result. It's the curation across many results that creates the distorted picture. And then, the pattern that matters most and gets noticed least, the credibility loop itself, where visible lifestyle signals make the advice feel more trustworthy, which drives more engagement and sales, which funds more lifestyle signaling, which makes the next round of advice feel even more trustworthy, entirely independent of whether the advice or the underlying success was ever actually sound. There's a specific tell worth knowing, one that separates genuinely transparent creators from the staged version far more reliably than the backdrop ever could. Real financial transparency tends to be inconvenient and specific. Actual account screenshots with dates, actual numbers that don't round suspiciously well, actual references to a bad month or a mistake made along the way. Staged success tends to be smooth, vague, and conveniently framed, round numbers, dramatic before and afters, with no messy middle shown, timelines that skip over anything that would complicate the narrative. Neither pattern proves anything with certainty on its own, but the difference between specific and inconvenient and smooth and convenient is a far better filter than anything visible in a single thumbnail. All right, here's the section nobody wants anywhere near a calculator when a rented supercar just showed up in someone's feed. Let's do this through Jess, because abstract patterns slide right off the brain. Say instead of purchasing that course for several $100s, partly influenced by the visible lifestyle, Jess had instead put that same amount into a simple index fund. Left alone for 20 years at a conservative 8%, that money becomes a meaningfully larger sum than the course itself ever promised to help her build, without a single simple trick required, just time and a decision not to pay for a credibility signal that was never actually informative. Here's the framework I want you to carry around. A lifestyle you can see in a video tells you almost nothing reliable about the advice being given inside it. The two are frequently unrelated, sometimes deliberately so. The real question was never, does this person look successful? It's, does this specific piece of advice hold up if I strip the backdrop away entirely and just read the words on a page? And now here's where it gets almost cruel. If visible lifestyle signals reliably predicted good financial advice, you could use them as a legitimate shortcut. They don't, reliably. Research comparing perceived creator credibility against the actual measurable quality of financial advice given finds close to no meaningful correlation between the two, which means the exact signal most viewers use to filter for trustworthy content is, statistically, almost useless for that specific purpose. Now, let me keep my promise, because I am not telling anyone that all financial content is fake or that every creator is staging their life. I can already hear the objections, because I get them every time I make a video like this. First, but some financial creators are genuinely transparent and legitimately successful. That's real too, completely fair, and genuinely true. Plenty of creators disclose sponsorships clearly, show real numbers with real context, and have built genuine verifiable success. The problem was never that all financial content is fake. It's that the visible signals alone can't tell you which category you're looking at, which means the backdrop was never a reliable filter in either direction. Second, but doesn't showing some success prove the advice works, at least a little? Also worth addressing directly, one person's outcome, even a completely real one, is a single data point, not proof that a strategy reliably works for people starting from different circumstances, which is true whether the success shown is staged or entirely genuine. The actual answer was never assume all financial content is fake or trust anyone who looks successful. It's evaluate the advice on its own logical merits, separately from how convincing the surrounding lifestyle looks. There's a third point worth naming honestly too. The platforms hosting this content aren't neutral in this dynamic either. Recommendation systems are built to maximize watch time and engagement, and aspirational, lifestyle-forward content reliably outperforms plain, cautious, heavily caveated content on exactly those metrics. That means the algorithm itself is quietly selecting for the more exaggerated version of financial content to show you more often. not because it's evaluating accuracy, but because it's optimizing for a completely different variable that happens to correlate with staged success far more than with honest, boring competence. So here's the framework I'd actually use. I call it the strip the set rule, and you can apply it to any piece of financial content in under a minute. Mentally remove the car, the backdrop, the visible markers of success entirely. Read or listen to just the actual advice or claim being made. Ask whether that specific claim would still sound credible and specific enough to act on with zero visual context attached at all. If the advice only sounds convincing because of what's happening in the background, that's the signal to slow down, not speed up. A few practical moves fall out of that. Look for creators who show boring context alongside the wins, average months, not just outliers, specific numbers with specific caveats attached. Be specifically skeptical of any content where the advice and the product being sold are tightly bundled together, since that's exactly where the incentive to oversell the lifestyle is strongest. Notice whether a creator ever shows a loss, a mistake, or an average result voluntarily, without being pressed to, since that's one of the more reliable tells that separates someone building genuine credibility from someone managing an image. And before making any real financial decision based on content you've consumed, ask whether you'd still make that same decision if you'd only ever seen the words, never the backdrop. So here's where we land, honestly and directly. This isn't a story about financial content being fake or the people who make it being dishonest as a category. It's a story about an incentive structure that rewards looking successful more reliably than it rewards being accurate, which means the visible signals most viewers use to judge credibility were never actually built to measure the thing people are using them to measure. The data doesn't say to stop watching financial content. What it says is quieter and far more useful. The advice and the lifestyle are two separate things, and only one of them is actually relevant to whether you should act on what you just watched. And if you're just right now, scrolling past that same kind of video, hear this clearly. You're not gullible, and you're not behind. You were responding to a signal specifically engineered across an entire content category to feel like proof when it was never actually built to prove anything at all. Of course it worked on you a little. It's designed to. Seeing it clearly is most of the battle. So Jess skips the course, keeps following the handful of creators who show boring, specific, verifiable numbers instead of just backdrops, and starts running the strip the set test on anything that used to move her instantly. The comparison feeling fades a little more each time, not because she stopped watching financial content, but because she stopped mistaking a rented set for a verified result. She still enjoys plenty of the content in her feed, she just no longer treats the backdrop as evidence of anything at all. Evaluate advice on the words, not the walls behind it. Skip the comparison that was never against something real in the first place. And the next time a video stops your thumb because of what's in the background, remember, that's exactly the reaction the background was built to produce. If this helped, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, have you ever found out a piece of financial content you trusted was more staged than you realized? I'll see you in the next one.